On the couch.
I think I've said this a couple times probably to some folks, so this joke might be old, but that was a little like the clip on the newsroom a couple weeks ago where the guy from the EPA is, talking about how we're all doomed. Are we doomed? I mean, is all this stuff going to happen? And if so, what are craft brewers going to do about it?
I don't think we're doomed. I mean, I am incredibly optimistic about the future. But I think it's going to take us understanding these issues and addressing them and not being afraid to ask the question. And I think, there's still, in my estimation, a lot of rhetoric, and there's just a lot of jockeying and a lot of politics going on instead of addressing some core issues. And, history will prove that the people who've been most successful are the ones who changed the rules, not the ones who said they should play by a different set.
Right.
And I think for too long, and at this point in the evolution of craft, I think we have to stop talking about playing by a different set of rules and really take up the charge of changing the rules.
Aren't those the same?
No, they're not. Carve-outs are not the same. When you're talking about carve-outs, when you're talking about dispensations for certain things, you're saying, I need a different set of rules than everybody else. And I think, tax breaks are great to get a brewery up and running. I'm fully in support of them. But I think there's an obligation when you're getting that break to understand where does it go and what do I have to give back for it instead of just putting it in my pocket. And those are the questions that I think we need to start asking.
How many people in your mind are asking these questions? I mean, are all craft brewers considering this stuff? Is it just a select few? I mean, these questions that you addressed.
Oh, I think, I'd ask you. I mean, you cover the landscape a lot more than I do. I know we talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
We're crafty, though. We're not craft. I don't know. I really can't tell you that. And, I think stats I heard are they're estimating over 10,000 people to go to the CBC this year in Portland. 10,000. So I think that's an opportunity to start raising some of these issues, not in a threatening way, but in a responsible way to let people know, hey, this is some of the stuff you got to start talking about in the future. It's interesting, there's a small brewery in Oregon that had a QA issue recently. And, all of a sudden, all hell broke loose because they didn't know how to do a recall. They didn't know how to track where their beer went. They didn't know how to basically alert everybody. They didn't know what was what was involved, in terms of letting the FDA know or letting accounts know. Those shouldn't be threatening things. That's business. But I think we have to start to understand that that's our obligation because it's becoming more than a small little curiosity in the industry. Yeah. It's becoming the industry.
Well, I mean, when we started this Brewbound thing, 4 years ago, the industry was at a totally different point then than it is now.
Sure.
And that was only 4 years.
Right.
So where do you, let's forget 2020. Where do you see it in the next 2 years?
Yeah.
What changes?
I think you're going to start to see. Well, you're already seeing it now. You're seeing the more national players or people trying to play the national game. You're seeing things like casual dining becoming more important to a lot of players. And I do think you see the consumer starting to allow craft to mainstream. And I don't think that's a bad word. I think you always need to stay ahead of it. So you're always going to need the fringe of craft that's doing the sours and the Belgians and really interesting things. But if the new normal becomes a hoppy beer, is that bad for us? I say that's great for us. So I think you're going to see more evolution in that direction even in the next couple of years.
Yeah. By the way, if you guys have questions and you're sending them in up here on the texting and tweeting, I'm getting them. Otherwise, my colleague Neil is going to be walking around collecting handwritten questions right now, so feel free to send them up. We do have a couple questions actually. One is 20 by 20 necessary? Is craft safe or more profitable at a lower target?
It all depends. I chat with a lot of brewers, and I think there should be a resistance to say we're going to go play the big game. I think small brewery models are fantastic. I can speak very openly. We're public. You don't want to get caught in the middle. I think when you're at a small level and you've got those economics like that small, mostly draft brewer that I showed on the left, life's pretty good. And you can probably run a lot, but I think ambitions get ahead of people. So what's better for craft? I think that everybody has to answer that individually. Whether or not you want to get into the big leagues and whether or not you want to start playing that game and whether or not you want to start playing in the off-premise and making those chain calls and having to deal with packaged beer really is an individual decision for everybody.
Yeah. So how should people think about making those leaps or not making those leaps?
I think it comes down to what do you want? I mean, I have a very strong opinion. Everybody thinks private equity is the answer. And, I chuckle, candidly, guys. I mean, I think everybody thinks private equity is just going to come in and give everybody some money and they're going to leave them alone. And, talk to some private equity folks. Exactly. I find it funny that some kind of an alliance with a big brewer is demonized, but private equity is great. Talk to any private equity person or anybody who's talked to private equity. One of the first 3 questions they're going to ask, what's my exit strategy?
Yeah.
My time horizon is 3 to 5 years, and maybe they'll leave you alone for a year or 2. And I'm generalizing, I know that. But I think the question is, what do you want to be? How do you want to get there? And what do you need to do in order to make sure that you can grow your business and realize your vision in a way that's authentic to who you are?
Speaking of the M&A activity, there's been a few deals this year, obviously. We hear there's, more on the way. It's pretty obvious, I think, that as the industry continues to mature and develop, that, private equity folks or larger strategics, there's going to be plenty of deals. Is that a concern at all? What does that money coming into the industry actually mean, and how does it impact all the things that you talked about, the hops
Yep.
and the capacity and the overcapacity?
I think it depends on how the money's being spent. Money coming in isn't a bad thing. Investment in the industry, I think, is fantastic. I'd argue, back to not being doom and gloom, if some of that money's deployed to address some of these long-term concerns, I think that's good. If that money is used to just propagate more of the same, I'm not so sure that's the best thing for the industry, and I'm not sure that's the best thing for the companies either.
All right. We got a few questions here, so I'm going to try to get to a couple of these, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. One that came in is, you guys just recently announced the strategic partnership with Appalachian Mountain, and says this question here says very different from the old Pabst plant mentioned. What's CBA's thinking behind the Brew Pub joint venture? What's in it for you guys?
I think what's in it for us is, we really believe in the local thing. I think I've made that pretty clear. And I think if you look at a state like North Carolina, it's really interesting to us in terms of what's happening there. North Carolina is the 9th largest beer state in the country. Really vibrant craft community now, especially with some of the majors moving in like Sierra and New Belgium. So what's in it for us is we met Sean through the Startup Brewery Challenge and the folks at Appalachian. It gives us an opportunity to do something we love to do, which is be local and work with a local brand and help that brand to grow in a pretty organic way. So what's in it for us is it helps us to broaden our reach. It helps us to have more relevance in North Carolina, and it helps us to bring somebody into the alliance that we believe is pretty complementary, both in terms of the fit culturally, in terms of the geography, and in terms of the brand and where they want to go with it. Right. I think deals like that are fantastic for everybody.
Switching gears with this question, with the surge in growth for craft brewers and all the openings, do you believe that there is an answer to ensure there are enough quality raw materials available?
I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a great question. And again, that's where I wish we would turn our attention more as an industry, is looking at more things like that and making those resources more available to craft brewers. Most of the major analysis being done and most of the major QA work being done is being done by the evil empires of the world. I think there probably needs to be some type of a consortium within craft that's doing that.
Is it more of a farming issue, or is it a processing issue?
It's fascinating. I mean, you could talk about that for hours, and I was having a hallway conversation with a couple of our guys, Doug Rayberg, who you guys will see later in the Startup Brewery Challenge, and one of our brewers named Joe Casey. And there are so many common sense issues when it comes to hops that nobody ever stops and thinks about. So you got to harvest them, and there's a time you can harvest. And some hops are harvested earlier in the season, and some are harvested later in the season. And all of a sudden, all of the kind of sexy hops are harvested right in the middle. And there's not enough literally harvesting capacity, to get things done. So I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's more than just an agricultural issue. It's an issue of understanding the supply available, when it's available, when you're going to be able to use it. And there's just some common sense thinking that probably needs to go into where hops go in the future.
Right. So clearly, some things to think about for the future with regards to materials, capacity, spending, obviously the excise tax stuff, the lobbying.
Yep.
If you is 50, I guess my final question is 50 million barrels realistic? That's 25% of the 200 million barrel industry.
Yep.
Is that realistic, and are we going to get there at 20 by 20? Are those trends that you showed, is that actually going to happen?
I think the answer lies in this room, to be honest with you. I don't think it's a consumer issue, which is what excites the hell out of me and excites the hell out of most of us at CBA, is the consumers voting for us. So I think it's up to us to take advantage of the tailwinds we've got and to address these issues so that we don't bump into them unexpectedly.
All right. Well, certainly some stuff to think about, and feel free to ask this guy questions all day. He's
All right.
here all day.
Thanks,
Thanks,
sir.
Andy.
Thank you.